Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or professional advice. The history and demographics discussed herein are based on historical trends and case studies, and individual circumstances regarding family law vary significantly by jurisdiction. We are not attorneys, and the information presented should not be used as a substitute for the counsel of a qualified legal professional. You are strongly encouraged to conduct your own due diligence and consult with experts in your specific state before making any decisions regarding domestic relations or legal filings. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff in 1979, looking down at a landscape where nearly half of all American marriages are projected to fracture. The air is thick with the residue of the 1960s Cultural Revolution, and for the first time in United States history, the legal gates have been thrown wide open. But there is a problem. The gatekeepers, the high-priced attorneys and the rigid court systems, are still charging a premium for entry. Fast forward to today, and that cliff has been replaced by a glowing screen. A new demographic has emerged, the digital scholar of dissolution. We are witnessing a monumental shift where the most private, painful transition in a person's life has moved from the mahogany-paneled offices of elite law firms to the search bars of online platforms. This is the era of the self-taught litigant, the user of what we now call Divorce University Online. But who are these people? Are they the wealthy looking for a discreet exit? Or the working class seeking a way out of a financial trap? The answer will surprise you, as it reveals a deep-seated change in the very fabric of American socio-economic life. Today, we are solving a massive problem for the modern U.S. audience: the confusion surrounding the democratization of legal knowledge. In this deep dive masterclass, we are peeling back the layers of history to understand exactly who uses these online educational resources, why the demographics have shifted from the elite to the everyday American, and how you can interpret these historical trends to understand the modern landscape of family law education. We are going to look at the data points that the traditional legal system often ignores, providing you with a comprehensive case study of the evolution of the American divorcee in the digital age. To understand the demographics of the modern online user, we must first look at the historical vacuum that created the need for a university-style approach to divorce. Prior to the mid-20th century, divorce in the United States was a luxury good. If you look at the records from the New England colonies or the late 19th century courts, the demographic was almost exclusively the upper middle and upper classes. Why? Because the legal requirement of proving fault, adultery, abandonment, or extreme cruelty required private investigators, witnesses, and extensive litigation. The average worker simply could not afford to learn the system, let alone navigate it. The first major demographic shift occurred with the no-fault revolution, pioneered by California in 1969. This was the catalyst for what would eventually become the online divorce education movement. When the legal barrier of fault was removed, the volume of cases exploded. By 1980, the divorce rate in the U.S. peaked at 22.6 divorces per 1,000 married women. This surge created a new class of users, the post-no-fault pioneers. These were middle-class individuals, often women, who found themselves thrust into a legal system that was suddenly accessible, but still cognitively dense. They were the first to seek out divorce education, in the form of community college workshops and self-help books, the primitive ancestors of the online university platforms we see today. Plus one, when we examine the transition into the digital era, specifically the late 1990s and early 2000s, the demographics of the divorce university user began to bifurcate along lines of education and income. A fascinating historical trend emerged. While divorce rates actually began to decline for those with four-year college degrees, their use of online educational resources for divorce increased. This seems counterintuitive at first. If they are getting divorced less often, why are they the primary users of online education? The data suggests that this demographic, high-income, highly educated professionals, values efficiency and discreet litigation. They were the early adopters of online platforms because they possessed the digital literacy required to navigate the first-generation web interfaces. They weren't just looking for a divorce, they were looking for a curriculum. They wanted to understand the why and how of asset division and co-parenting before ever stepping foot in a lawyer's office. Contrast this with the demographic shift seen in the 2010s. As mobile technology became ubiquitous, the divorce university user base expanded to include the working class and rural populations. For these individuals, online education wasn't just a luxury of efficiency. It was a financial necessity. Historical case studies from this period show that the average user was no longer just the suburban professional, but also the rural parent living 2 hours away from the nearest county seat. These users utilized online platforms to bridge the geographical and financial gap. They became pro-se litigants, individuals representing themselves, using digital courses to learn how to file motions, calculate child support, and draft parenting plans. This democratization of legal education through online universities allowed a demographic that had been historically marginalized by the cost of legal counsel to finally participate in the system. We also have to look at the gray divorce demographic, a group that has defied the general downward trend of divorce rates in the 21st century. Since 1990, the divorce rate for adults ages 50 and older has roughly doubled. This demographic is unique because they are often the most asset-heavy users of online resources. They aren't just learning about custody. They are using online university modules to understand the historical complexities of QDROs, qualified domestic relations orders, social security benefits, and the long-term impact of splitting a 30-year pension. This group represents a sophisticated demographic that uses online education to supplement, rather than replace, traditional counsel. They are the hybrid users, combining the deep-dive knowledge of digital platforms with the precision of professional oversight. The racial and ethnic demographics of these users also tell a vital story about U.S. history. Historically, Black Americans have faced higher rates of divorce due to systemic socioeconomic pressures, yet they were often underserved by the traditional legal education complex. The rise of online divorce university platforms provided a scalable, lower-cost alternative that has seen significant adoption within minority communities. By providing access to the same educational modules as the wealthy, these platforms have begun to narrow the information gap that has historically plagued the American family court system. In this masterclass, we are going to break down these demographics into 10 distinct waves, starting with the early adopters of the 1990s and moving through the smartphone revolution of the 2020s. We will examine how the user persona of a divorce education platform has changed from a desperate individual looking for any help to a calculated consumer who treats their divorce like a business merger. We will explore the specific data points that show how educational attainment is the single greatest predictor of how a person will interact with online legal tools. By the end of this series, you will understand not just who is using these tools, but how the very nature of American identity is reflected in the way we choose to end our most sacred contracts. This is not just a study of numbers. It is a study of the American heart in the digital age. We are about to go even deeper into the first wave of the 1990s, the desktop divorcees, and how they set the stage for everything we see today. Keep watching because the shift from paper to pixels changed everything about how the law works for you. To understand the desktop divorcee, we have to travel back to a time when the internet was a screeching sound coming through a telephone line. In the mid-1990s, the demographic using online resources for divorce was vanishingly small, yet incredibly influential. These were the early adopters, predominantly white-collar professionals who had access to personal computers at a time when a standard desktop setup could cost upwards of $2,500. This financial barrier acted as a natural filter. The users were often engineers, academics, or corporate managers, people who were comfortable with data but uncomfortable with the opaque nature of the legal system. They were the first generation to realize that the information asymmetry maintained by high-priced law firms could be challenged by a well-indexed database. Imagine if you are James in 1996 Chicago. James is a middle manager at a logistics firm. He is facing a domestic situation that feels like a black box. In 1996, his options are limited. He can go to a law library and wander through stacks of heavy, leather-bound books, or he can pay a retainer that represents 3 months of his salary just to have a conversation. Instead, James buys a subscription to an early online service provider. He navigates to a message board titled Legal Discourse. This is the primitive version of the modern online divorce university. James represents the specific demographic of the information seeker. He is not just looking for a form, he is looking for a curriculum. He spends his nights printing out hundreds of pages of forum posts and early HTML guides. This shift from physical libraries to digital forums was the first step in the democratization of family law education. The historical trends of this era show that these users were highly motivated by a desire for privacy. In small-town America or even tight-knit professional circles, walking into a prominent local law office carried a social risk. The online user demographic of the 90s was characterized by a need for anonymity. They were the ones lurking in chat rooms, absorbing the collective trauma and legal victories of others before they ever identified themselves. This demographic was also heavily skewed toward men in the early 90s, simply because men were more likely to hold tech-adjacent jobs at the time. However, by 1998, a massive shift occurred as internet access began to penetrate the domestic sphere. Case studies from the late 90s show a surge in female users who were using these online universities to level the playing field. Many of these women were stay-at-home mothers or worked in sectors with lower pay. For them, the online divorce university was a tool of empowerment. It provided them with the vocabulary to talk to their husbands' attorneys. They weren't just learning how to file for divorce. They were learning the historical context of marital asset division and the nuances of the 1984 Retirement Equity Act. They were becoming their own paralegals. This was a radical departure from the historical norm where one spouse often held all the legal and financial cards. By the time we hit the year 2000, the demographic had shifted again. The dot-com boom brought a new level of professionalism to online legal education. The users were no longer just on message boards. They were enrolling in early structured digital courses. These people were the professional optimizers. They viewed divorce not just as a failure, but as a complex administrative project that required a specific skill set. They were looking for potential outcomes that favored long-term stability, rather than immediate emotional satisfaction. They were the first to use early spreadsheet software to calculate child support based on the formulas they found online, often showing up to court with more accurate data than the attorneys representing the other side. Think about the sheer audacity of this demographic in the context of U.S. history. For centuries, the law was something that happened to you. By the early 2000s, the users of online divorce platforms were making the law something they participated in. They were challenging the status quo. The demographic was increasingly suburban, middle class, and highly literate. They were the people who bought the For Dummies series of books but wanted the real-time interaction of a digital platform. This group paved the way for the sophisticated user base we see in 2026. In the current year of 2026, we look back at these desktop divorcees as the pioneers. Back then, they had to deal with slow page loads and unreliable information. Today, the demographic has expanded to include every socioeconomic bracket, but the core motivation remains the same: the pursuit of agency through education. The historical data points toward a clear trajectory where the user becomes more sophisticated as the technology becomes more accessible. We see this in the way users in the early 2000s began to demand more than just forms. They wanted video content, interactive Q&A sessions, and peer-to-peer support networks. They were building a community-based university model that bypassed the traditional gatekeepers. The impact of this demographic shift cannot be overstated. It forced the legal industry to change. When a large enough group of people, the educated middle class, starts using online tools to bypass traditional services, the market has to react. We saw the birth of unbundled legal services and limited scope representation as a direct result of the demographics of these online users. They didn't want to hand over their entire case. They wanted to buy the parts of the process they couldn't handle themselves. They were the ultimate DIYers of the legal world. Let's look at another case study. Imagine Sarah in 2004. The internet is faster, and the first wave of dedicated divorce education sites has launched. Sarah is a freelance graphic designer. She represents the new gig economy demographic. She doesn't have a corporate legal plan. She doesn't have a massive savings account. What she has is time and a high degree of research ability. Sarah uses an online divorce university to map out her entire strategy over a 6-month period. She studies the historical trends of custody arrangements in her state. She looks at case studies of people in her exact income bracket. By the time she files, she has a 50-page binder of research. The demographic of the online user in the mid-2000s was characterized by this type of hyper-preparedness. This era also saw the rise of the Silver Surfer demographic. Older Americans, who were previously thought to be tech-averse, began using these platforms in record numbers. As the divorce rate for those over 50 began to climb, so did their presence in online legal forums. This group brought a different set of needs to the online university model. They weren't focused on child custody. They were focused on the historical complexities of long-term property division and health insurance. They were use case studies in how to disentangle lives that had been intertwined for decades. Their presence online forced platforms to develop more sophisticated modules on retirement and estate planning. But as this demographic grew, a new problem emerged. The sheer volume of information became overwhelming. The user of 2010 was different from the user of 1995. The 1995 user was desperate for any data. The 2010 user was drowning in it. This created a demand for curated education, a true university experience where the noise was filtered out. The demographic was now looking for experts, not just peers. They wanted a structured path through the chaos. This led to the professionalization of the online divorce coach and the integration of psychological support with legal education. The shift was moving from the desktop divorcee, who sat at a stationary PC, to a demographic that was about to be changed forever by a device that fit in their pocket. The era of the stationary researcher was coming to an end, and a much more volatile mobile-first demographic was about to take over the digital legal landscape. But before we get to the mobile revolution, we have to talk about the massive legal backlash that threatened to shut down these online universities entirely. In the next part, we are going into the era of the legal gatekeepers. We will explore how the traditional bar associations reacted when they realized a massive demographic was no longer knocking on their doors, but was instead learning the law for themselves online. We will look at the high-stakes court battles that decided whether or not an online university could even exist. You won't want to miss how the demographic of the accused shifted from the users to the creators of these very platforms. The legal profession in the United States has historically functioned as one of the last true guilds, a protected class where knowledge was sequestered behind the bar exam and the billable hour. As the demographic of the online divorce university user grew in the early 2010s, it hit a massive institutional wall. The established legal gatekeepers began to view these educational platforms not as a public service, but as an existential threat to their historical monopoly. This created a period of intense friction where the demographic of the accused shifted from the individuals seeking a divorce to the pioneers who were building the digital classrooms. Imagine if you are Marcus in 2011. Marcus is a retired software engineer who, after going through his own grueling and expensive divorce, decides to create an online portal that simplifies the filing process for others in his home state of North Carolina. He isn't offering legal advice. He is offering a curriculum on how to navigate the bureaucratic maze. He believes he is helping a demographic of lower to middle income families who have been priced out of the system. However, the State Bar Association sees it differently. Within 6 months of launch, Marcus receives a cease and desist letter, alleging the unauthorized practice of law. This scenario played out across the country, from Texas to New York, as the legal establishment fought to maintain control over the definition of legal help. The historical trends of this era show a fascinating demographic divide. On one side, you had the committees of the bar associations, predominantly composed of older male attorneys who had practiced for decades in a pre-digital world. On the other side were the users of these platforms, a diverse, tech-savvy, and financially strained demographic that viewed the law as a set of rules they should be able to learn, rather than a mystery they had to pay to solve. This was a clash of cultures. The users were often millennials and Gen Zers who were already using the internet to diagnose their health issues and manage their investments. They didn't understand why the law should be any different. Case studies from the 2010s highlight the demographic impact of these legal crackdowns. When a major online divorce education platform was temporarily shut down or restricted in a specific state, the demographic that suffered the most was not the wealthy, who could still afford private counsel, but the working class. These were the people who were living paycheck to paycheck and needed to understand how to file for a simplified dissolution of marriage without taking on thousands of dollars in debt. The historical data shows that during these periods of legal uncertainty, the number of pro-se filings, cases where people represent themselves, continued to rise, but the quality of those filings dropped. Without the online university models to guide them, this demographic was left to navigate the system blind, leading to a surge in rejected forms and delayed court dates. Step by step, the legal system attempted to deconstruct what these online platforms were doing. First, they looked at the software. Was the algorithm choosing the forms for the user? If so, the gatekeepers argued that was a legal judgment. Second, they looked at the instructional videos. Was a non-lawyer explaining the historical trends of alimony? If so, they argued that was providing legal counsel. This forced the online divorce universities to evolve. They had to become more academic, more structured, and more careful. They shifted from saying this is what you should do to this is how the system has historically worked in your jurisdiction. Ironically, this legal pressure made the platforms better. It forced them to adopt a true university-style approach, providing deep-dive educational modules rather than just quick-fix templates. Imagine if you are Elena in 2014, a schoolteacher in a rural county. You have been using an online platform to study the complexities of the 50-50 property split. One Tuesday, you log on and find a black screen with a legal notice stating the site is under investigation. For Elena, this isn't just a technical glitch. It is a denial of her right to education. This demographic of users began to form an online resistance. They started taking to social media and public forums to argue that access to legal information is a fundamental right. This pressure eventually led to a slow but steady shift in the legal landscape. Some states began to create a new category of professional, the limited license legal technician, or the legal document assistant. These were the middle ground professionals who were born out of the demographic demand for affordable online guided help. The demographic of the online user during this period of resistance was characterized by a high degree of skepticism toward traditional institutions. These were the same people who were starting to move their money into digital banks and using apps to manage their legal documents. They were the pioneers of the legal literacy movement. They didn't just want a divorce. They wanted to understand the mechanics of the law. They were the demographic that would spend hours reading the historical case studies of custody battles in the 1970s to understand why the current laws were written the way they were. They were becoming a more informed citizenry, which, historically, has always been a challenge to the established order. By 2016, the data points began to shift. Several high-profile court cases, including those involving companies like LegalZoom and Nalo Press, resulted in settlements or rulings that allowed online legal education platforms to continue operating, provided they met certain disclosure requirements. The gatekeepers realized that they couldn't stop the tide. The demographic demand was too strong. The number of people seeking online divorce education was growing by double digits every year. The historical trend was moving toward a hybrid model, where the demographic of the self-taught litigant was officially recognized as a permanent fixture of the U.S. legal system. This era also saw the rise of the social media literate user. This demographic didn't just use the online university. They reviewed it. They shared their potential outcomes on YouTube and Facebook. They created a feedback loop that forced platforms to constantly update their curriculum. If a court clerk in a specific county in Ohio started rejecting a certain type of form, the online community knew about it within hours. This collective intelligence was a new demographic phenomenon. It was no longer just an individual studying in isolation. It was a hive mind of users refining the curriculum in real time. As we look at this from the vantage point of 2026, we see that the battle of the gatekeepers was a necessary friction that defined the modern era of legal education. It forced the platforms to be more rigorous and the users to be more diligent. It crystallized a demographic that is defined by its autonomy. These are the people who believe that the most important legal transitions in their lives should be handled with a level of personal knowledge that only a deep dive education can provide. They are the students of the online university, and they are not going back to the old ways. But just as the legal battles were settling, a new technological wave was forming on the horizon. The demographic was about to change again, shifting from the person sitting at a desk with a binder full of notes to a person who could manage their entire legal life while standing in line at a grocery store. The stationary desktop era was dying, and the era of the mobile-first, hyper-connected divorcee was about to begin. In the next part, we are going to dive into the mobile revolution of 2018 to 2022. We will look at how the demographic shifted to a much younger, faster-paced audience and how the introduction of the smartphone changed the very psychology of how people learn about the law. You will see how the university model had to shrink its lessons into bite-sized modules and what that meant for the quality of the education. This was the moment where divorce education went from a deep study to a daily habit, and the implications for the American family were profound. By 2018, the landscape of the American family began to reflect a new hyper-connected reality that shifted the demographic profile of the online divorce university user almost overnight. We entered the era of the mobile-first litigant. This was the moment in U.S. history where the desktop computer, once the centerpiece of the home office and the primary tool for legal research, was largely abandoned in favor of the device in the user's pocket. For the first time, more than half of all traffic to online legal education platforms originated from mobile devices. This wasn't just a change in hardware. It was a total transformation in the psychology and socioeconomic background of the people seeking this information. The new demographic was younger, more ethnically diverse, and significantly more integrated into the gig economy. These users didn't have the luxury of sitting at a desk for 3 hours to study the historical trends of equitable distribution. They were learning the law in the cracks of their lives. Imagine if you are Jessica in 2019. Jessica is a 32-year-old mother of two living in Atlanta, Georgia. She works as a freelance graphic designer and supplements her income by driving for a rideshare service. Her life is lived in 15-minute increments. When she finds herself facing a separation, she doesn't go to a law library or hire a consultant for a $1,000 retainer. Instead, she downloads a mobile-optimized divorce university app. Jessica represents the transient scholar demographic. She watches 3-minute modules on how to prepare a domestic relations financial affidavit while she is waiting in the airport cell phone lot for her next fare. She listens to deep-dive audio lessons on the history of Georgia's child support guidelines while she is folding laundry at 11 p.m. For Jessica, the online university isn't a place she goes. It is a resource that follows her. This demographic shift meant that the creators of these platforms had to completely re-engineer their curriculum. The era of the 50-page PDF was over. The era of the micro-learning module had begun. Historical trends during this period show that the democratization of legal information through mobile technology specifically empowered the lower to middle income bracket. In previous decades, if you couldn't afford a high-end personal computer or a stable home internet connection, you were effectively locked out of the digital legal revolution. By 2018, however, the ubiquity of the $100 smartphone and the expansion of 4G and 5G networks meant that a warehouse worker in Ohio had the same access to high-level legal education as a corporate executive in Manhattan. The data from this era is staggering. Between 2018 and 2022, engagement rates on mobile legal platforms in the U.S. grew by over 300%. The most frequent users were no longer the desktop divorcees of the 90s, but mobile mavens, who demanded that legal education look and feel like the other apps they use daily. They wanted progress bars, gamified checklists, and push notifications that reminded them to study the historical application of the best interests of the child standard before their next mediation session. This period also saw the TikTokification of the divorce university curriculum. While the content remained academically rigorous, the delivery became much faster. Educators began using short-form vertical video to explain complex concepts like the difference between separate property and marital property. This demographic didn't want a lecture, they wanted a breakdown. They wanted to see a case study presented in 60 seconds, followed by a link to a deeper academic white paper if they chose to dive in further. This approach allowed people with shorter attention spans or more chaotic schedules to absorb the same level of legal literacy that was once reserved for those with the time to read massive textbooks. Then came the 2020 pandemic, the single greatest accelerator in the history of online legal education. When the physical courthouses across the United States slammed their doors shut in March 2020, the demographic of the online university user expanded to include literally everyone. It was no longer just the tech-savvy or the budget-conscious. It was the wealthy, the elderly, and even the traditional attorneys themselves. Everyone was forced into the digital classroom. During the lockdowns, we saw the rise of the pandemic pro se litigant. These were individuals who, facing sudden job losses or economic uncertainty, could no longer justify the expense of traditional legal representation, even if they had the money before. They turned to online platforms to understand how to navigate the newly digitized court systems. Case studies from 2020 and 2021 show a massive surge in people learning how to conduct their own Zoom hearings. The online universities had to pivot once again, creating entire courses on digital courtroom etiquette and historical trends of virtual testimony. Consider the case of David in 2021. David was a hospitality manager in Las Vegas who lost his job when the Strip shut down. He was in the middle of a complex custody dispute that involved interstate jurisdiction under the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act, UCCJEA. Before the pandemic, David might have felt overwhelmed by the technicality of the law. But with the world on pause, he treated the online divorce university like a full-time job. He studied for 8 hours a day. He became so well-versed in the historical precedents of home state jurisdiction that he was able to successfully argue his own motions when his case finally moved to a virtual courtroom. David represents the forced expert demographic, people who became highly legally literate because they had no other choice. As we stand here in 2026, we can see that the mobile revolution of 2018 to 2022 created a permanent shift in American society. The demographic of the user is now truly universal. We see retirees using tablet-optimized courses to handle their asset divisions, and we see Gen Z couples who prioritize conscious uncoupling, using these platforms to ensure their separations are handled with the same level of digital precision they apply to every other part of their lives. The mobile era didn't just change how we learn. It changed what we expect from the law. It removed the mystery. When a demographic can access a historical breakdown of every judge's ruling tendencies in their county from the palm of their hand, the traditional power dynamics of the courtroom are forever altered. The user is no longer a passive participant in their own life. They are a mobile-enabled strategist. But this rapid-fire, mobile-first education created its own set of risks. As the modules became shorter and the delivery became faster, was the depth of understanding being sacrificed for the sake of speed? Were users confusing a 60-second video with a true understanding of the historical complexities of family law? This tension between quick info and deep knowledge led to the next major evolution in the demographics of the online university. In the next part, we are going to explore the era of the smart university and the integration of artificial intelligence. We will look at how, by 2024, the demographic shifted toward users who weren't just searching for information, but were using AI-driven tools to predict potential outcomes of their cases before they even filed a single paper. We will dive into the algorithmic litigant and how data-driven divorce education began to replace gut feeling and traditional legal intuition. You will see how the university moved from teaching the past to predicting the future, and what that meant for the average American family. By the arrival of 2024, the United States witnessed a fundamental pivot in the demographic profile of the online legal scholar. We transitioned from the era of information retrieval to the era of predictive synthesis. This period marks the birth of the algorithmic litigant. In previous decades, a user of an online divorce university was looking for what the law said. In 2024 and 2025, the user demographic shifted toward individuals who wanted to know what a specific judge would likely do. This shift was fueled by the integration of large language models and massive datasets of historical court records into the university curriculum. The demographic using these tools became more calculated, less emotional, and incredibly focused on data-driven strategy. Imagine if you are Robert in early 2026. Robert is a 45-year-old project manager in Seattle, Washington. He is a high-earning professional who is accustomed to using data to mitigate risk in his corporate life. When his marriage enters a period of irreconcilable transition, Robert does not start by calling a law firm. Instead, he logs into a high-level online divorce university that has integrated predictive analytics. Robert represents the quantified self-demographic. Just as he tracks his heart rate, his sleep cycles, and his investment portfolios, he now tracks his legal risk. He inputs variables such as the duration of his marriage, the specific zip code of his filing, the current valuation of his restricted stock units, and the historical trends of spousal support in King County over the last 10 years. Robert is not looking for a template, he is looking for a probability matrix. The online university provides him with a curriculum that analyzes thousands of case studies similar to his own. It shows him the potential outcomes of a trial versus a mediated settlement based on the historical behavior of the local judiciary. This demographic is characterized by a high degree of digital fluency and a deep skepticism of the traditional, hourly billed legal model. They view the law as a system of patterns that can be decoded through education and technology. For Robert, the online university is a tactical command center. The historical trends of this period show that this data-driven demographic is not just limited to the tech elite. By 2026, the cost of these predictive tools has dropped significantly, making them accessible to the middle class. We see a massive surge in users from the suburbs of the Midwest and the growing tech hubs of the South, like Austin and Nashville. These users are often Gen X and millennials who grew up with the internet and expect transparency. They are the same demographic that uses online platforms to diagnose their health issues or manage their own retirement accounts. They are comfortable with algorithms and prefer the cold, hard data of a case study over the subjective advice of a human consultant who might have their own biases. Let us look at a step-by-step breakdown of how this demographic interacts with the 2026 era online university curriculum. First, the user engages in a discovery phase. Unlike the 1990s where this meant reading a book, this now involves an interactive dialogue with a pedagogical AI that assesses their legal literacy level. Second, the user enters the data mapping phase. They are taught how to organize their financial and personal history into a format that a court-mandated algorithm can process. Third, the user engages with the predictive module. This is where they study historical trends of judicial rulings in their specific jurisdiction. They are looking for patterns in how judges have historically handled things like the division of cryptocurrency, the valuation of home-based businesses, or the nuances of nesting parenting arrangements. This era has also seen the rise of the tactical negotiator demographic. These are users who use the online university to prepare for mediation. Historically, mediation was a process where a neutral third party helped two people come to an agreement. In 2026, the demographic of online university users shows up to mediation with a tablet full of data. They have studied the historical trends of what constitutes a fair settlement in their income bracket. They use the university's curriculum to stay 3 steps ahead of the negotiation, understanding the potential outcomes of every concession they make. This has led to a significant decrease in the length of time it takes to reach a settlement, as both parties are operating from a shared baseline of educational data. Case studies from 2025 highlight a fascinating subdemographic: the rural technologist. Imagine a rancher in Montana or a small business owner in rural Maine. Historically, these individuals were at a massive disadvantage because they lived hours away from the specialized legal knowledge found in big cities. With the advent of the predictive online university, these users are now able to access the same high-level historical analysis as someone living in New York City. The data shows that the gap in legal outcomes between urban and rural populations has begun to narrow for the first time in U.S. history. This demographic uses the online platform to ensure they are not being steamrolled by the traditional power structures of their local small-town courts. However, this shift toward the algorithmic litigant has created a new kind of social pressure. We are seeing a demographic of users who are almost too informed. This leads to what sociologists are calling predictive anxiety. Because the users can see the historical trends and the potential outcomes of their case in such stark detail, they often become hyper-focused on small percentage shifts in their favor. They might spend dozens of hours in the online university trying to move their probability of a specific outcome from 60% to 65%. This demographic is highly stressed, hyper-educated, and demands a level of precision from the legal system that the system is not always prepared to provide. Step by step, the online university has transformed from a library into a simulator. The users are no longer just reading about the law. They are practicing it in a virtual environment. They run simulations of their own hearings, they practice their testimony against AI-driven cross-examination modules, and they study the historical body language and speech patterns of successful litigants. This is a level of preparation that was historically available only to the ultra-wealthy who could afford thousands of hours of attorney time. Now, it is the standard for the demographic of the digital-first American. As we move further into 2026, the demographics are continuing to evolve. We are starting to see the first wave of Gen Z users entering the online divorce university space. This demographic is unique because they have never known a world without instant algorithmic answers. They are not just looking for data, they are looking for a community of people who are using the same tools. They are integrating their educational journey with social media, sharing their case studies anonymously and seeking peer reviews of their strategies. The demographic is becoming more collaborative, turning the solitary study of the law into a shared, data-driven experience. But this rise of the machine-guided litigant has sparked a new debate. As people rely more on algorithms and historical trends to guide their life-altering decisions, what happens to the human element? Are we losing the capacity for empathy and individual nuance in our pursuit of the perfect, data-backed settlement? The demographic that is mastering the algorithm is also starting to realize that the law is not just a math problem. It is a human story. This realization is leading us toward the next major shift in the online university model. In the next part, we are going into the era of emotional intelligence and the psychological shift. We will explore how the demographics of 2026 are suddenly demanding that their online universities teach them more than just the law and the math. They are asking for modules on co-parenting psychology, conflict de-escalation, and the historical trends of emotional recovery after divorce. You will see how the university is being forced to hire therapists alongside attorneys, and how the demographic is shifting from the tactical negotiator back toward the whole person. The machine is learning to feel because the users are realizing that a data-perfect divorce can still be a human disaster. Stay with us as we look at how the university is evolving to heal the heart, not just the bank account. The year 2026 has brought about a fascinating phenomenon in the demographics of online legal education: the rise of the holistic student. This is the demographic that has moved past the cold algorithms of asset division and into the high-stakes world of emotional intelligence. In previous waves of U.S. history, the user of an online divorce university was primarily a tactical operator, someone looking to maximize their financial return or minimize their legal exposure. But today, the data shows a massive pivot. A new majority has emerged, users who are prioritizing psychological resilience and long-term family stability over the scorched earth tactics of the past. This demographic is characterized by a deep understanding that a data-perfect divorce can still be a human disaster if the emotional infrastructure is not properly managed. Imagine if you are Michael in 2026. Michael is a 42-year-old nurse practitioner living in Columbus, Ohio. He has spent the last 15 years building a life, a home, and a family. When he and his spouse decide to transition into a new chapter of separate lives, Michael finds himself at a crossroads. He is technically proficient and has already used the university's predictive AI to map out his potential outcomes regarding his 403(b) and the equity in his suburban home. But Michael is terrified. He is terrified of the historical trend of high-conflict divorces, leading to parental alienation and long-term psychological trauma for children. Michael represents the conscious litigant demographic. He doesn't just want a decree. He wants a roadmap for a functional future. Michael enrolls in the university's Advanced Emotional Intelligence and Co-Parenting track. This isn't a side course. It is a core curriculum that has seen a 450% increase in enrollment since 2024. This demographic of users is spending more time in modules titled The Neuroscience of Conflict De-Escalation and The Historical Evolution of the Best Interest of the Child standard than they are in the property division calculators. They are learning step by step how to manage the amygdala hijack that occurs during a difficult mediation session. They are studying case studies of families who successfully transition to a co-parenting model, analyzing the specific communication patterns that led to those potential outcomes. The historical context of this shift is profound. If you look back at the 1980s, the demographic profile of a divorce seeker was often driven by the adversarial nature of the court system. The law was a blunt instrument used to punish or protect. By the early 2000s, it became a bureaucratic process to be navigated. But in 2026, the demographic has realized that the court system is ill-equipped to handle the nuances of human emotion. These users are taking their education into their own hands to bypass the conflict-heavy traditional model. They are the same demographic that values mindfulness, therapy, and mental health awareness in their professional lives, and they are bringing those values into the legal sphere. Let's break down the curriculum this demographic is mastering. Step 1 is the emotional audit. The user is taught to identify their own triggers and the historical patterns of conflict within their marriage. Step 2 is the communication scripting phase. This is where the university provides real-time, AI-assisted feedback on their emails and text messages to ensure they are remaining business-like and child-focused. Step 3 is the conflict coaching module, where they watch videos of simulated high-conflict scenarios and learn the historical techniques of parallel parenting versus co-parenting. This is deep-dive education that turns a stressed individual into a professional-grade negotiator of their own life. The demographic data from 2026 reveals another subgroup, the generational cycle breakers. These are predominantly users in their late 20s and early 30s, Gen Z and late millennials, who grew up as the children of the high divorce era of the 90s. They remember the historical trends of their own parents' legal battles, the court-appointed evaluators, and the tension of the every other weekend schedule. This demographic is using online divorce universities as a preventative measure. They are enrolling in these courses even before filing for divorce, using the education to determine if a collaborative approach is even possible. They are highly skeptical of the win-lose mentality and are the primary consumers of modules on nesting arrangements, where the children stay in the home and the parents rotate in and out, a concept that would have been statistically insignificant in the demographics of 1995. Case studies from 2025 and 2026 show that users who complete the emotional intelligence modules have a 60% lower rate of returning to court for post-decree litigation. This is a staggering statistic that has caught the attention of insurance companies and large employers. We are seeing a trend where some U.S. companies are providing subscriptions to these online universities as part of their employee assistance programs. The demographic has shifted from the isolated individual to the corporate-supported student. Employers have realized that an employee who is educated on how to handle the psychological aspects of a divorce is significantly more productive than one who is drowning in the chaos of a high-conflict legal battle. Consider the case of Sarah in 2026, a software lead at a major firm in Austin. When she realized her marriage was ending, she used her employer-sponsored access to an online divorce university. Instead of taking weeks of leave to deal with the stress, Sarah spent 30 minutes a day in the university's resilience training module. She learned the historical application of the right of first refusal in her state and used that knowledge to draft a parenting plan that was so detailed and psychologically sound that her spouse's attorney had no choice but to accept it. Sarah represents the empowered professional demographic, users who treat their divorce with the same level of intellectual rigor they apply to a product launch. This era also marks the rise of the parenting coordinator demographic. These are users who are not just learning for themselves, but are learning how to manage their ex-partner. They use the university to understand the psychology of the high-conflict personality. They study case studies on the historical success of the gray rock method of communication. By the time they reach a courtroom, they are so well educated on the dynamics of human behavior that they are often more composed than the professionals in the room. This demographic shift is forcing the legal system to evolve, as judges are now seeing litigants who are incredibly well-versed in the psychological standards of child development. But as this demographic of holistic, highly educated students grows, it has exposed a new divide in U.S. history. While the middle and upper middle classes are using these tools to create peaceful, collaborative outcomes, what is happening to the demographics that don't have the time or the digital literacy to engage with a 100-hour curriculum? We are seeing the emergence of a two-tiered system of dissolution. One tier is the educated exit, characterized by the users of these online universities who achieve stable, mediated potential outcomes. The other tier is the traditional trap, where those without access to this deep-dive education are still caught in the expensive, high-conflict cycles of the past. This brings us to a massive open loop in our deep dive. As the online divorce university becomes the gold standard for the American middle class, a new demographic is emerging that spans across borders. In the next part, we are going to explore the global litigant. We will look at how, by late 2026, the demographics of these platforms shifted to include the international couple, people living in the US but with assets, children, and legal ties in other countries. We will dive into the historical complexities of the Hague Convention, on the civil aspects of international child abduction, and how the online university had to become a global legal powerhouse to keep up. You will see how the American demographic is no longer just American, and how the digital classroom is now navigating the laws of multiple nations at once. Stay with us because the world is about to get much smaller and the legal stakes much higher. The transition from a domestic legal challenge to a multinational jurisdictional puzzle represents the most complex demographic shift in the history of online divorce education. As we move through 2026, the user profile of the online divorce university has evolved into what experts call the global litigant. In previous decades, the typical user was concerned with the laws of a single U.S. state, perhaps California's community property rules or New York's equitable distribution. But the modern American demographic is no longer a monolith contained within 50 states. Due to the massive explosion of remote work between 2020 and 2024, and the historical trends of global labor mobility, a significant portion of the U.S. population now maintains lives that cross oceans. This demographic consists of dual citizens, green card holders, and American expats who have returned home with foreign-born spouses, children born abroad, and assets scattered across multiple tax jurisdictions. Imagine if you are Matteo in 2026. Matteo is a software architect living in San Francisco, but he holds dual citizenship with Italy. His spouse, Sophie, is a French national. They were married in London 10 years ago, lived in Dubai for 3 years, and eventually settled in the United States. They own a condo in Paris, a retirement account in the UK, and a primary residence in California. When their marriage reaches a point of dissolution, Matteo does not just face a California court. He faces a conflict of laws that would baffle a traditional local attorney. Matteo represents the international professional demographic, a group that is highly educated, tech-literate, and deeply reliant on online university modules to untangle a web of global treaties. Matteo doesn't start by booking a flight to London or hiring a firm in Paris. Instead, he logs into the international wing of his online divorce university. This demographic is driving the demand for a curriculum that covers the historical application of the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international child abduction. They are not just looking for forms. They are looking for a deep-dive masterclass on how to prevent a jurisdictional nightmare. This demographic spends hundreds of hours studying modules on the habitual residence of a child, a legal concept that has seen a massive amount of litigation in U.S. history as families become more mobile. The online university provides Matteo with step-by-step details on how to document the center of a child's life to ensure that the U.S. remains the proper forum for custody. This is high-level legal strategy that was once the exclusive domain of elite, $600 an hour international law firms. Now, it is being consumed by a demographic of middle-class global workers who use digital platforms to level the playing field. The data from 2025 shows that 15% of all users on premium online divorce platforms in the US are now navigating at least one international element. This demographic shift has forced the online university to expand its historical case study database to include international precedents. Users are now studying the historical trends of how US courts treat foreign prenuptial agreements. For example, a user might dive into a case study of a marriage contract signed in Germany and how a court in Texas might view its validity under the Uniform Premarital and Marital Agreements Act. This is a level of academic rigor that defines the 2026 user. They are not passive, they are active researchers. They are learning the nuances of comity, the legal principle where one jurisdiction recognizes the acts of another, and how it applies to their specific potential outcomes. The financial demographics of these global users are equally fascinating. We are seeing a surge in what is known as the asset-fluid demographic. These are individuals who may have a modest income in the US, but hold significant ancestral property or business interests in countries like India, Mexico, or the Philippines. Historically, these assets were often ignored or hidden in domestic divorces because the cost of discovery was too high. However, the Online Divorce University of 2026 provides modules on global asset tracing and the historical trends of international financial disclosure. Step by step, these users are taught how to utilize international tax treaties and information-sharing agreements to create a transparent financial picture. They learn how to value a family business located in a different time zone and how to handle the currency fluctuations that can radically change the value of an asset between the date of filing and the date of settlement. This demographic is incredibly detail-oriented. They use the university's spreadsheets to track exchange rates and study the historical impact of the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act (FATCA) on divorce settlements. They are becoming their own international forensic accountants. Furthermore, we must look at the demographic of the immigrant success story. These are users who may have arrived in the US with very little but have built significant wealth. When they face a divorce, they often deal with cultural expectations from their home country that clash with US law. The online university has responded by creating modules on cultural jurisprudence. This demographic uses the platform to understand how to bridge the gap between their traditional values and the legal realities of the American court system. Case studies from 2026 show that this group is particularly interested in how US courts handle dowries, religious marriage contracts, and international support obligations. They use the university as a translator not just of language but of legal philosophy. The rise of the global litigant has also created a new subdemographic, the digital nomad divorcee. These are individuals who have no fixed address, working from laptops in Bali, Lisbon, or Medellin while maintaining legal residency in the US. Their demographic profile is young, ultra-tech savvy, and highly skeptical of physical courtrooms. They are the primary drivers of the demand for completely virtual, asynchronous legal education. They want to watch a module on the historical trends of interstate jurisdiction while sitting in a co-working space in Thailand. They are the ones pushing the boundaries of what it means to be a litigant in the 21st century. As these users master the complexities of international law, they are inadvertently creating a new standard for the American legal system. By the time they actually engage with a human attorney, they often know more about the international nuances of their case than the professional they are hiring. This has led to a demographic of users who act as co-counsel in their own cases. They provide the research, the historical data, and the jurisdictional strategy, using the attorney only for the final filing and courtroom appearance. This is the ultimate expression of the democratization of knowledge. But as the world gets smaller for the global litigant, a new and much more volatile demographic is emerging within the US borders. While some are looking across oceans, others are looking deep into the digital code of their own lives. We are seeing the rise of a demographic that isn't defined by where they live, but by what they own in the virtual world. The next great challenge for the Online Divorce University isn't a foreign country. It's a decentralized network. In the next part, we are going into the era of decentralized assets and virtual identity. We will look at how the demographics of 2026 are shifting toward users whose entire net worth is tied up in cryptocurrency, NFTs, and virtual real estate. We will explore the historical trends of the 2022 to 2024 crypto winters and how they influence the way the online university teaches asset valuation. You will see how the demographic of the digital native is forcing the university to become a school of blockchain forensics and what happens when the most valuable thing in a divorce doesn't actually exist in the physical world. Stay with us because the definition of property is about to be rewritten. As we pivot into 2026, the definition of what constitutes a marital asset has undergone a radical transformation that has fundamentally altered the demographic makeup of the online divorce university user. We have officially entered the era of decentralized assets and virtual identity. In the early days of these platforms, students were learning how to divide physical homes, cars, and traditional pension plans. Today, the demographic has shifted toward the digital native, a group whose primary wealth often exists entirely on a blockchain or within a virtual ecosystem. This user is younger, more tech-forward, and views the world through a lens of encryption and decentralization. This shift has forced online universities to develop a curriculum that is less about traditional accounting and more about blockchain forensics. Shutterstock. Imagine if you are Jordan in 2026. Jordan is a 34-year-old software engineer and part-time Web3 developer living in Austin, Texas. Over the last decade, Jordan and his spouse have built a life that is almost entirely digitized. They do not own a massive suburban home. Instead, they have spent years acquiring high-value virtual real estate in decentralized metaverses and a diverse portfolio of decentralized finance protocols. When their relationship reaches its conclusion, Jordan does not look for a lawyer who specializes in real estate titles. He looks for a digital education that can teach him how to untangle a smart contract. Jordan represents the crypto-native demographic, a segment of the U.S. population that values privacy, technical precision, and the ability to verify assets without a centralized intermediary. The historical trends leading to this moment are rooted in the volatility of the early 2020s. Between 2022 and 2024, the United States saw a series of massive shifts in the digital asset market, from the collapse of major centralized exchanges to the eventual institutional adoption of digital ledgers. These historical events are now taught as foundational case studies in the online divorce university. The user of 2026 is a survivor of these cycles. They are highly educated on the difference between custodial and non-custodial wallets, and they use the university modules to understand the potential outcomes of asset valuation in a market that never sleeps. They are learning step by step how to perform a digital audit that can stand up in a traditional court of law. Step 1 of this digital audit curriculum involves identifying the entry and exit points of capital. The online university teaches the user how to analyze years of bank statements to find the initial transfers to centralized exchanges. Step by step, the student learns to cross-reference these transfers with public ledger data. This demographic is incredibly diligent. They are not just looking for a total number, but for the specific wallet addresses that have been used to move assets through decentralized mixers or into cold storage. The demographic has become a class of amateur investigators, using the university's specialized software tools to map out the flow of marital funds through layers of encryption. This era also marks the rise of the influencer couple demographic. Imagine if you are Alex and Casey, a couple who has spent the last 5 years building a joint brand on social media platforms. They have 5 million followers and a revenue stream based on their shared identity. In the eyes of the law in 2026, their most valuable asset is not their bank account, but their intellectual property and the digital identity they have created. The online divorce university has had to build entire modules dedicated to the valuation of a digital brand. This demographic uses these tools to understand historical trends in brand split-offs and the potential outcomes of dividing a YouTube channel or a shared TikTok account. They are learning how to quantify the future earnings of a personality-driven business, a task that traditional family law has historically struggled to manage. Case studies from 2025 highlight the complexity of these situations. We have seen instances where the most contested asset in a divorce was not a house, but a specific non-fungible token that granted the owner exclusive access to a high-level professional network. The demographic seeking this education is looking for ways to fractionalize these assets or create buyout agreements that reflect the true market value of a digital token. They are studying the historical application of property law to intangible assets, looking for precedents that can help them navigate a system that is often 5 years behind the technology. Furthermore, we are seeing the emergence of the virtual real estate developer demographic. These are users who have invested heavily in digital land, building virtual storefronts and galleries that generate real-world income. The online university provides deep-dive education on how to value this land based on historical traffic patterns and the specific utility of the virtual location. This is not just a game to these users. It is a significant portion of their net worth. They use the university to learn how to draft digital quitclaim deeds that can be executed on-chain, ensuring that the transfer of virtual property is as legally binding as a physical deed. The psychology of this demographic is also distinct. They often possess a deep-seated distrust of traditional institutions, which is what led them to decentralized assets in the first place. This makes them the perfect students for an online university model. They prefer to learn the mechanics of the law themselves rather than delegating the task to a professional who may not understand the nuances of a liquidity pool or a governance token. This demographic is characterized by a drive for total transparency and a desire to use the very technology that holds their wealth to facilitate its division. However, the rise of the algorithmic litigant in this space has created a new type of digital hide-and-seek. For every user learning how to perform an audit, there is another demographic looking for ways to use decentralized protocols to obscure assets. The online divorce university has had to take a stand, providing ethical frameworks and education on the historical consequences of asset concealment. Case studies from recent years show that the potential outcomes for those who try to hide digital assets are often severe, as the permanence of the blockchain makes it nearly impossible to truly erase a paper trail. The university teaches its students that in the world of decentralized finance, transparency is the only viable long-term strategy. As we move toward the final stages of our deep dive, we see that the demographic of the digital native is pushing the online university into the realm of total legal integration. The students are no longer just learning about the law. They are helping to rewrite it by presenting their digital-first cases to a system that is forced to adapt. They are the pioneers of a new type of domestic relations, where the ledger is the final authority and the code is the contract. But even as we master the digital world, there is one final demographic shift that is perhaps the most significant of all. It is the demographic that has been watching all of this from the sidelines, waiting for the technology to become so simple that even the most tech-averse individual can use it. We are entering the age of the universal user, where the barriers to entry have completely vanished. In the next part, we are going into the era of the invisible interface and the universal demographic. We will look at how, by late 2026, the online divorce university moved from a complex curriculum to a seamless voice-activated experience. We will explore how this opened the doors to the elderly, the disabled, and the historically marginalized, creating the most diverse student body in the history of legal education. You will see how the university became a true public utility, and how the demographic of the student finally became a perfect reflection of the American public. The loop is almost closed, and the final revelation will change how you think about the future of the family forever. The year 2026 marks the definitive end of the digital divide in the landscape of American legal education. We have entered the era of the invisible interface, a historical turning point where the demographic of the online divorce university user has finally become indistinguishable from the demographic of the United States population itself. In previous chapters of this deep dive, we tracked the early adopters, the tech-savvy professionals, and the mobile-first pioneers. But for decades, a significant portion of the American public remained on the sidelines. These were the individuals who found traditional software too complex, the language too academic, or the physical requirements of research too taxing. By the late months of 2026, those barriers have been systematically dismantled, not by more features but by fewer. The technology has become so sophisticated that it has effectively disappeared, leaving behind a seamless, conversational experience that caters to the universal demographic. Imagine if you are Evelyn in 2026. Evelyn is 79 years old and living in a quiet community in Arizona. She is part of the silver tsunami of late-life dissolutions, a demographic shift that has been accelerating since the early 2010s. Historically, someone like Evelyn would have felt completely alienated by the online divorce university models of 2015 or even 2020. The tiny buttons, the nested menus, and the requirement for precise typing were insurmountable hurdles. But in 2026, Evelyn does not interact with a screen. She interacts with a presence. She sits in her favorite chair and speaks to a voice-activated assistant that has been specifically trained on 40 years of family law history. Evelyn represents the silver tech scholar. She is not learning how to code. She is using natural language to untangle her 40-year marriage. Evelyn's experience is a masterclass in accessibility. Step by step, the invisible interface guides her through a verbal audit of her life. It doesn't ask her for a PDF of her pension. It asks her to remember when she and her spouse started their joint accounts. It uses advanced speech pattern recognition to identify when she is confused or stressed, slowing down the curriculum and offering historical case studies in an audio narrative format that feels like a podcast rather than a lecture. This demographic shift toward the elderly is one of the most significant in U.S. history. It has forced the legal education industry to prioritize clarity over complexity, proving that when the interface becomes invisible, the education becomes universal. Now, imagine if you are Kevin in 2026. Kevin is a veteran living in Michigan who lost his sight 3 years ago. In any previous era of U.S. history, Kevin's ability to represent himself or even understand the nuances of his legal situation would have been entirely dependent on expensive human intermediaries. The Online Divorce University of 2026, however, has moved beyond simple screen readers. It uses haptic feedback and spatial audio to help Kevin navigate a mental map of his legal journey. He can feel the structure of his case through tactile interfaces on his smartphone, and he learns the historical trends of veterans' benefits in divorce through immersive audio environments. Kevin represents the accessible litigant. The data from 2026 shows a 400% increase in users with disabilities engaging with high-level legal education. This isn't just about compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. It is about the historical realization that legal literacy is a fundamental right that must be accessible to every physical and sensory profile. This universal demographic expansion has also solved the historical problem of the legal desert. In many rural parts of the United States, from the Appalachian Trail to the plains of the Dakotas, access to legal information was historically gated by geography. By late 2026, the invisible interface has bridged this gap. High-speed satellite internet and low-latency voice AI mean that a rancher in a remote corner of Wyoming has the same pedagogical support as a paralegal in New York City. The demographic in these regions is no longer just looking for basic forms. They are engaging in deep-dive study of the historical trends of land rights and water usage in marital dissolutions. They are becoming experts in the laws that govern their specific way of life, using the university as a localized tool that understands the unique socioeconomic pressures of rural America. Let's look at a case study of this socioeconomic leveling. Imagine Maria in 2026, a first-generation immigrant in Florida whose primary language is Spanish. Historically, the English-centric nature of the U.S. legal system created a massive information gap for people like Maria. Even the early online universities often relied on clunky, inaccurate translations. In 2026, however, the university's curriculum is linguistically fluid. It doesn't just translate the words, it translates the concepts, accounting for the historical differences between civil law systems and the U.S. common law system. Maria can study the history of Florida's equitable distribution laws in her native tongue, with the AI providing real-time linguistic bridges to help her understand the English language court proceedings she will eventually face. Maria represents the translinguistic scholar, a demographic that is rapidly becoming a powerhouse in the online education space. The historical impact of this shift cannot be overstated. By mid-2026, the Online Divorce University has essentially become a public utility. Just as the public library democratized access to books in the 19th century, the invisible interface has democratized access to the law. We are seeing a demographic that is more legally literate than any generation in U.S. history. They are not just following rules, they are questioning the historical foundations of those rules. They are using their education to advocate for policy changes, moving from being students of the university to being contributors to the legal discourse. The data shows that the number of pro-se filings that are successful on the first attempt has climbed to nearly 80% in jurisdictions where these invisible interfaces are widely used. This is a potential outcome that few would have predicted back in the clunky desktop era of the 1990s. Step by step, the university has moved from a destination to an environment. It is present in the smart glasses of the young professional, the tablet of the retiree, and the voice assistant of the stay-at-home parent. It has adapted to the demographic reality that Americans are busier, more diverse, and more demanding of efficiency than ever before. The pacing of the education has changed to match the human heartbeat. It isn't about rushing through a degree. It's about providing the right piece of historical context at the exact moment the user needs it. This is the ultimate fulfillment of the promise of the digital age, a system that serves the human, rather than forcing the human to serve the system. As we look at the demographics of late 2026, we see a tapestry that finally matches the census data. The Online Divorce University is no longer a tool for the elite or a survival kit for the tech-savvy. It is the standard operating procedure for the American family in transition. But as this universal demographic reaches the end of their legal journey, they are discovering something unexpected. The education doesn't end with the final decree. The university has built a bridge to a phase of life that most historical legal systems completely ignored. The loop is closing, but the story is not over. As these millions of universal users graduate from their legal courses, they are forming a new demographic, the post-divorce alumnus. In the final part of our masterclass, we are going to look at the future of the family. We will explore how the online university is evolving into a lifelong platform for co-parenting management, financial rebuilding, and psychological growth. We will look at the potential outcomes of a society where everyone is legally literate, and how the historical institution of marriage itself is being redesigned by the very people who studied its dissolution. Stay for the finale, because we are about to reveal the final data point that explains why the divorce university might just be the most important educational institution of the 21st century. We now enter the final and most transformative phase of this historical deep dive: the emergence of the post-divorce alumnus. By the end of 2026, the demographic profile of the online divorce university user has undergone a final radical expansion. We are no longer just looking at people in the midst of a crisis. We are looking at a permanent class of graduates who have integrated their legal and emotional education into the very foundation of their new lives. Historically, the end of a divorce was marked by a final decree, a piece of paper that theoretically closed the door on a chapter. But for the 2026 demographic, the final decree is merely a commencement ceremony. This group has realized that the complexities of the modern American family do not vanish when the judge signs the order. Instead, they have turned the online university into a lifelong platform for family architecture. Imagine if you are Tyson in late 2026. Tyson is the 40-year-old father of 3 living in Denver. He finalized his dissolution 6 months ago using a high-level digital curriculum. In any previous era of U.S. history, Tyson would have deleted his bookmarks, stopped his subscriptions, and tried to forget the legal system existed. But Tyson represents the graduate demographic. He is still logged in. He is now using the university's postgraduate modules to manage the historical trends of long-term co-parenting. He isn't looking for a divorce anymore. He is looking for a strategy to navigate the next 18 years of shared decision-making. Tyson uses the platform's step-by-step modules on modifying parenting plans as children age, understanding the historical impact of inflation on child support adjustments, and even preparing for the legal nuances of remarriage and blended families. Tyson's demographic is the reason why online divorce universities have evolved into relationship architecture centers. This group is characterized by a drive for proactive maintenance. They have studied the case studies of families who failed to update their documents and saw the potential outcomes: years of expensive litigation and emotional strain. To avoid this, they use the university as a family dashboard. They are learning step by step how to conduct annual financial reviews with their ex-spouses through a neutral digital interface. They are studying the historical trends of college tuition inflation and using the university's specialized calculators to ensure their 529 plans are on track according to their settlement agreements. This is a level of longitudinal responsibility that has never before been seen in the demographics of American divorcees. The historical data from 2026 reveals a startling subdemographic that few predicted: the pre-marriage scholar. We are seeing a massive surge in users who are not getting divorced at all. These are engaged couples, particularly from Gen Z and the late millennial cohorts, who are enrolling in the divorce university to understand the legal mechanics of marriage before they say their vows. They are studying the historical trends of marital property versus separate property, not as a way out, but as a way in. They are using the curriculum to draft comprehensive, fair, and psychologically sound prenuptial agreements. This demographic shift represents a total inversion of the university's original purpose. It has moved from a tool of dissolution to a tool of prevention and structural integrity. Consider the case of Liam and Maya in 2026. They are both 26, living in Seattle, and planning their wedding. Instead of just picking out flowers, they are spending 2 hours a week in the university's marital contracts module. They are looking at case studies of how the division of labor and assets affects the long-term success of a marriage. They are using the university's data to have difficult conversations about debt, inheritance, and career sacrifices before they become legal issues. Liam and Maya represent the integrated citizen demographic, people who believe that legal literacy is an essential part of romantic partnership. By studying the demographics of those who came before them, They are attempting to rewrite the historical trends of their own generation. This brings us to the final data point, the one that explains why this institution has become the most important educational shift of the 21st century. In 2026, researchers began to see a direct correlation between the rise of online legal education and a significant drop in what sociologists call high-conflict recidivism. Historically, about 30% of divorced couples in the U.S. found themselves back in court within 3 years of their final decree to argue over modifications or contempt charges. However, for the demographic that completed a deep dive online university curriculum, that number has plummeted to less than 5%. The step-by-step details of this drop are found in the quality of the settlements. Because the users were educated on the historical pitfalls of vague language, they created documents that were essentially bulletproof. They learned how to define holidays, transit times, and medical decision-making with a level of precision that left no room for the ambiguity that traditionally fuels conflict. This demographic of highly educated litigants is effectively starving the conflict-driven legal industry. They have moved from being victims of the system to being the engineers of their own peace. This is the ultimate potential outcome of a society that prioritizes legal literacy over legal dependency. Step by step, we have seen the American public move from the shame-filled, backroom divorces of the 1950s to the tech-enabled, data-driven dissolutions of the 2020s. We have watched the demographic shift from the elite to the universal, and from the reactive to the proactive. The online divorce university has mirrored the history of the United States itself, a story of democratization, technological disruption, and the relentless pursuit of individual agency. It has proven that when you give people the tools to understand the rules of their own lives, they don't just follow the rules, they improve them. As we look at the legacy of this movement in late 2026, we see a transformed U.S. legal system. Courthouses have become smaller, more efficient, and more focused on the truly complex cases, because the vast majority of the population is now capable of managing their own domestic relations through education. The demographic of the student has become a reflection of a new American identity, one that is informed, resilient, and deeply committed to the idea that knowledge is the only true way to navigate the most difficult transitions of the human experience. The university has not just taught people how to end a marriage, it has taught them how to be more responsible citizens of their own families. But as the 2026 academic year comes to a close, a new and even more ambitious project is being whispered about in the halls of these digital institutions. The data gathered from millions of successful graduates is being used to build something that could render the very concept of a divorce university obsolete. A new demographic is forming, one that isn't just studying the past or managing the present, but is using the collective intelligence of the digital alumni to create a completely new type of social contract. In the next semester of our human journey, we are going to explore the rise of the synthetic household and the birth of the blockchain-verified family. We will look at how the lessons learned in the divorce university are being used to create a new legal framework for the 2030s, where traditional marriage is replaced by dynamic, multi-party agreements that adapt to the changing needs of the modern world. You will see how the demographics of the future are moving beyond the binary of married or divorced into a fluid, data-verified landscape of human connection. The deep dive isn't over. It's just moving into a new dimension. Stay with us because the history of the family is still being written, and you are the ones holding the pen.